Good morning all. Tony McNamara is my name. I'm representing Marjorie Ferguson, our Planning Institute of Australia President, or Division, New South Wales Division President. Unfortunately, she couldn't make it here today, so she asked if I could come forward and just make a few comments here. I'm a planner, I'm not an architect, so I'll try not to tread on architects' toes. A lot of good, great commentary here today, and design excellence is, I think, absolutely a goal that we should be looking for. But as mentioned before, what is it? What is design and what is excellence? I'm going to give you a bit of a local government approach to what is seen as goals or a desirable goal in terms of city development from a plan and a perspective in local government. We haven't talked much about community consultation here. There's been a sort of fairly rarefied atmosphere about experts, design professionals and so forth, but local government, if you don't engage, engage with your community on major changes, you'll end up in trouble. You'll be seen as a little bit elite, a little bit moving away or not in touch with what that community is about. So my particular council, which is Canada Bay Council, spends a lot of time and effort, probably too much on DAs, I've got to say, because that's just a straight out political football until you can come up with something that people agree on. But where it really is fundamental is with strategic planning, urban renewal, and you do need a good process, not just throw in some thoughts and see what comes out of it there. Establishing community values, looking at what that might mean in terms of principles, and then turning that into meaningful instruments for change, I think is a process that does require a lot of professionals, consultation professionals, architects, urban designers, planners, and I think it takes time to build a confidence with your community so that it not looks like here's the talk but there's the action. You've got to follow through. If you say you're going to do it, you get on and do it. And if you're going to change the rules, and in a major sense, you can often set yourself back 12 months or 2 years, but you've got to do it. If you're really going to go through fundamental revisions of planning controls, it's just not something you can do overnight. Somebody mentioned the Queen Mary, absolutely correct analogy there. I do want to talk about problems with planning controls, and I think I think Jan McCready said it pretty well before, but we've got, in my view, planning controls don't support design excellence. LEPs, they've been mentioned, they essentially land use control and probably land use separations, heights and floor space ratios. Master plans are not encouraged, even though when you're talking complex urban renewal areas, I think master plans are absolutely essential elements to work through a process there, but they're not written into legislation anywhere. DCPs, which is where a lot of our detail has been developed in the past, they're very constrained by legislation now, and then they can't be seen as sort of taking forward the planning controls. They're actually seen as sort of more of a shadow of the LEP. I'm a bit embarrassed. I was part of the Department of Planning team at one stage, trotting around the state, talking about the planning template. The intent of that was to kind of get a common language and a simplification, because there was a lot of very creative LEP type processes around the state where you had to be a bit of a guru to actually understand in any LEP. Unfortunately, it stopped at that point rather than using that as a common base to really work forward. And sadly, I think it's a pretty basic instrument there. It's very reflective of stuff that they were turning out in the 1950s as planning schemes and so forth. And it's a real throwback to the past. And I think fundamentally it needs to be revised. And I'll talk a little bit further about that in a minute. Likewise, it's interesting that big challenges often go to Land Environment Court. And it's been put to me that Land Environment Court never looks for best outcomes, it looks for minimum compliance. Get it over the line, job done. So it sets a low bar, not a high bar, and don't talk excellence when you get to Land Environment Court. Getting back to my notes here, urban renewal, The experience that, well, I think it's happening all over Sydney, and we've got priority precincts. We've got areas such as at Rhodes, in my particular area, Parramatta Road, and then if Canada Bay amalgamates with Strathfield and Burwood, we've got a lot of big urban renewal precincts happening in a very attractive area, extremely high land values, and it just seems to be that as land values get higher, the intent to, obviously the economic imperative or the ability for redevelopment takes on a new aspect. Communities are usually pretty sceptical about change. Nobody moved into an area just to see it torn down and replaced around you. They moved to an area for good reason, or they grew up in an area. Why change? I'm here. How could you make it better? The tough argument from council or urban growth or Department of Planning and developers is that the change, which is usually increase in density, will bring benefits to that area. And particularly if you're not a developer, you're not going to live in the development, and you're not going to have a business in that development, how do you convince me that all that change is going to give me some benefits when you know it's going to bring traffic, congestion, noise, dust, destroy the roads with construction and so forth? It's a big challenge, but I honestly think design excellence and master planning, trying to sort of quantify what do they mean from my context. I think that they're realities at that point. You can actually demonstrate. If you can't demonstrate it, I think you've got a real problem, because you've only got two options. There's all this urban renewal gives you a better outcome or it gives you a worse outcome. I can't imagine it'll give you the same sort of lifestyle quality as you had when it was low density. So we really have to convince our communities and prove it that we're going to bring benefits and life will get better. Challenge there. But going through that, and I think we've got enormous gaps becoming very, very obvious. The big one that jumps out at me is open space. And I think it was explained before, you get Commonwealth funding for things like infrastructure, to build roads and rail and probably airports and tunnels, but nobody seems to want to fund up Commonwealth money to buy open space. I was talking with one of our members the other day and said, whatever happened to that 7 acres per 1,000? It was a good old rule that was around for a long time, it's sort of enshrined. It seems to have just disappeared. But just think local government for a moment. We're actually not just building buildings, we're bringing new communities in. The city is just thriving with families, young families and children. And every child every good parent says they shouldn't be on the screens all the time. They should be out doing stuff. So it's ballet and it's soccer and it's netball and it's whatever else, The demands on open space in the city are enormous, and children don't play and train at night. They play on weekends. And so suddenly everybody converges on your playing fields. They're all really under pressure for that usage. And you can't justify that, well, sorry, there just isn't enough space. Every child has to be able to play soccer, play netball, and so forth. They all do it, which is a good sign, but I don't see any serious contributions coming for open space. Local government can't afford it because we all know the price of land, but we can afford the tunnels, we can afford the freeways, and we can afford the buildings to house the people. So, big issue there that's got to be resolved. High-rise open space doesn't usually provide playing fields. It might provide other things. Our transport infrastructure is under pressure. We're all encouraged to provide transport-orientated developments, but when you look at suburban railway stations, probably the best one I've got in mind is Rhodes. It's got a finite capacity, and it's quite quantifiable. And unless you build longer platforms or longer trains, there's a tolerance that is reached, and we're reaching that. Utilities are a big issue. The city's never really planned to tear down the suburbs and put up high-rise, and they all require a lot of improvement to utilities. And likewise, drainage. We're just creating a lot of hard space. Jan's mentioned it before. If you're right next to the harbour, it's not too bad. You tend not to flood, but there's a lot of areas that do. And providing that, that drainage is become an issue. So I'm dumbing this down a little bit. This is not design excellence. This is bread and butter stuff. You know, this is what makes a city work. But if you can get these things right, also focus on the building design, the public spaces, the urban design. An element that goes with that, I think, is planning reform. Sorry to bore you. You might have heard that before. Institute worked on that for a long time, and a lot of effort went into that, and it all sort of went, lost the plot somewhere along the way with politics. We hear it's been introduced or implemented incrementally, which is a funny way to do things because it tends to mean you keep adding bits and you usually don't chop out too much. So one of our big issues with the Institute was dealing with what somebody called spaghetti legislation of acts and LEPs and DCPs and SEPs, and all the SEPs prevail over everything else. And the DCPs were getting a very legal status through the Land Environment Court, and then that was sort of denatured by statute. And then we get guidelines, and then we've got guidelines for consideration, and then guidelines which are for adoption. So we sort of graduate from black letter law through to kind of greyish law to sort of fairly soft law, but there's a lot of it, and why does a DA assessment for anything residential, quite comfortably have 100 plus conditions and 60, 80 pages of stuff? It's not because buildings are that complex, in my view. It's because everybody's worried about going to court and not having given proper consideration to everything that has to be considered. When you've read it all, you're still confused, but you've done the job. Got to do something about that. It's just incredible. It can't be best practice. It just can't be. I'm sure the UK can do that better, and I'm convinced of it. Yeah, but again, how do we get? How are we going to look for best practice and design excellence when we've got a non-supporting sort of framework of legislation that's all over the shop? I'll wrap up because I've been told. We've got to finally, and again, it's a bit local government, but I think it's universal. Our city needs to support a healthy, productive lifestyle for its citizens. I think good planning and good urban design can achieve this, but it's becoming more and more of a challenge. It's not easy, but I can only commend today's proceedings for working towards that outcome, and it'd be lovely if we can distill some great points out of today as guidelines for where we might achieve that design excellence. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.